Hi, welcome to this week's Retvlog, where we're going to be keeping a close eye on the changes coming up on the BfA over the next few weeks, including the changing situation with Hammer of Wrath again, slightly changed APL, issues around tuning. I'm just going to talk a little bit about our defensives and Azerite trait tuning as well. In particular, one of the Azerite traits I was looking at last night was like, who the hell would do this? So to begin with, I should probably just talk about a little error last week. I forgot to update on Selfless Healer. I was talking about Selfless Healer and forgot to update the fact that it doesn't work off Judgement now. It works off Holy Power Spenders, which is actually better for stacking it up a little bit more quickly. So if you're a fan of Selfless Healer, it will at least stack up. You have to stack it up more times, because it's 4 times now, but it does go a little bit more quickly there. Really annoying. I had it on my notes and everything, and then just... I usually only refer to my notes when I actually get stuck and I forget what I'm talking about. So I'm going to pay more attention today. Now, Hammer of Wrath. So another thing I said last week. So what had happened was, we're very glad Hammer of Wrath's come back. A lot of people are certainly very glad, but it's not baseline. It's always been baseline. This is the thing. It's always been baseline. And that in itself isn't necessarily a compelling reason for it to be baseline. Again, it could be a talent, but there were various issues. To begin with, I was being told but it was always obvious it would be better as baseline. The problem with Hammer of Wrath is the nature of it means that at certain haste levels, you're going to get an extra Hammer of Wrath out during your Avenging Wrath. At that point, it's going to make it much more powerful. And when you make it a talent, what you're actually saying is, in that situation, okay, if your haste is within this range, it's actually not going to be as good as the other ones. If you tune them all reasonably well on the row, it's not going to be as good as the others. But actually, if you get just over that haste level, it's going to be better than the others. So you're taking it almost purely based on what your haste level is. So that's really annoying. But if you made it baseline, that wouldn't be an issue. So the argument, first of all, that I was getting was, oh, well, it's to do with this downtime quota that they've got to increase the amount of downtime. But they seem to have scaled that requirement back a little bit now. We're still, I think, going to have more downtime than we've had in Legion, but, you know, not as much. To the point where I know a lot of people are asking on forums, and people have been putting in comments as well on my video saying, oh, you know, if only they would reduce the recharge time on Crusader Strike. I know that's one thing they are thinking of. I don't know where it's gone with that, because the last time I heard that they were thinking of that, that was also, you know, before I knew that they were going to be doing the Art of War thing. So it's sort of a few weeks old, that information. So I don't know where they've gone with that, because they haven't done it as yet. So, but that is something that is potentially going to happen. But with Hammer of Wrath, yeah, so that was the first argument. And then it was being scaled back. So I was saying, oh, well, you know, are they going to make it baseline now? And then the answer was no, because, you know, only warriors are allowed to baseline execute. The thing that makes ours okay as an execute is because it's a talent, which is absolute nonsense. There's plenty of things that's different about Hammer of Wrath compared to a warrior's execute. It's ranged. It generates resources as opposed to using them, you know. There's so many things that clearly make it different to a warrior's execute. You don't have to come up with the usual nonsense about, oh, well, yeah, if one's baseline and one's talent, then that's different enough for us. There's glaring differences. But anyway, so that was it. And it was like, okay, so they're not going to allow it to be baseline then. No sooner had I put the video out last week than I was being told, oh, actually, it might be back on the table. They're just changing their mind all the time. So it is possible. I mean, the only thing, they know that people really want it baseline, by the way. So on the one hand, I wouldn't necessarily say, oh, well, we might as well just keep saying on forums. But actually, it doesn't do any harm just to keep saying on the forums that it'd be much better baseline. Because it would, because as I say, and if you need a reason, the biggest reason of all, because some people's reasoning will simply be, I want Hammer of Wrath, and I don't really want to choose between this talent and this talent. That's going to fall on deaf ears, because at the end of the day, the whole point of talents is you're supposed to choose between which one you prefer. And let's be realistic on that road. Mostly, I'm not saying Fires of Justice has no use, but really what we're talking about is Blade of Wrath or Hammer of Wrath. So, but if there is a reason, it is this, and it is because of the nature of Hammer of Wrath only being used during Avenger Wrath. Yeah, sure, execute as well, but that's variable, depends on the boss. Because of that, you have a situation where you'll get at most haste levels 3 during an Avenging Wrath. Then above a certain haste level, you can get a 4th one out. At that point, it becomes effectively during Avenging Wrath, you're going to do a 3rd more damage with this talent. So it becomes more powerful, much more powerful than the other talents. Whereas below that, not, you know, at best on par. So you create a tuning nightmare, an absolute tuning nightmare. That's a good enough reason for it to go baseline in my view. So if you're going to put something on the forum, you could always put that. That would potentially work. But it is worth keeping the pressure on that one. And you might also, just referring back to what Blizzard said, they sort of said this non-publicly before anyway, that there's not going to be any more major changes to abilities. Okay. And some people may think, well, that means that they're not going to change its baseline, because that would be a major change to the ability. But actually it wouldn't. Because all they'd be doing is they're making it baseline. The ability already exists. So what they could do, what we've been talking about for months, and they have been thinking about, is you could make Hammer of Wrath an execute only ability. Make it baseline. So it doesn't work during Avenging Wrath. It only works during execute. Then the talent can be something that allows it to work during Avenging Wrath. That's just one thing, by the way. So in other words, the talent does what Hammer of Wrath talent does now. It's just that we get a weaker version effectively for use baseline. And that would work. And that's not a major change because nothing's really changing. You're just, you know, it's exactly the same as the Blade of Wrath change. So what they did is Blade of Wrath, 4 procs per minute, you know, chance to reset Blade of Justice. Reset the cooldown on it. And what they did is they made Art of War, which always used to use Exorcism, but Blade of Justice is just physical exorcism anyway. And they have 2 procs per minute. So 2 procs per minute baseline, and they called it Art of War, and the talent bungs it up to 4 procs per minute. It increases the damage of Blade of Justice as well, but that's a tuning thing. Adding damage onto it is just a tuning issue, not changing what it does. It doesn't change the ability. So that's an example of the sort of thing, even after they've stopped designing stuff and they're into tuning, which is where they are now. They are now into tuning, and we've started to see a little bit of that in the last few days. And once they're into tuning, they cannot make major changes, because you waste all your time. Because they've not just got to tune abilities within the spec, they've got to make sure that specs of the same role are roughly in step with each other as well. Now, that doesn't mean to say that you can now start paying attention to any fools who decide to put out comparison lists based on throughput. If people want to compare specs for a particular role based on what they bring to the table, that's fine, that's fair enough. In fact, you can do that now because the abilities are there. But in terms of throughput, in terms of DPS, sims and stuff like that, they're always worthless anyway, anytime, but they're still going to be worthless for some time to come. So yeah, so they could still make that change without it being a major change, if you see what I mean. A much more worrying one is Divine Judgment. Now, I like the concept of Divine Judgment, I have to say. I do like it. The problem is that we're not going to take it, and the issue is this. So first of all, it's on the AoE row. Now we do more damage in an AoE situation with Divine Judgment, so it deserves to be on that row. However, in an actual AoE situation, we'd want to take Consecration or Wake of Ashes. Oh, by the way, before I forget, I've written it on there, just checking. They've monkeyed about with the auras a little bit recently. Sometimes as well, this is something to watch out for if you like looking at Wowhead and stuff like that, and you look at abilities, you know, and you might look at an ability and it's been nerfed or something like that. It looks like it's been nerfed. Sometimes it hasn't always, because what they've done is we have the auras that sort of give a flat amount of damage to things like, you know, spell power abilities, physical abilities, things like that. And sometimes they amend those, and to compensate, nerf the individual abilities. So it looks like a nerf, but it's not always. So they monkeyed about with like spell abilities that work off spell power. But I was looking at like comparing Consecration and Wake of Ashes, stuff like that. There's very little difference in proportionally between each other. There's no real difference at all when I was looking at it. So it's all seems to be the same. But yeah, do watch out for that. If something in isolation looks like it's a buff or a nerf, sometimes it's not. It's just that they've changed some of the aura value and they've changed the individual one to compensate. Maybe raising one and reducing the other. But yeah, so you'd want to take Consecration or Wake of Ashes in that AoE situation. It's going to do more damage. The benefit of Divine Judgment is always that you can AoE around yourself and do more judgment damage on a priority target, say. That was the benefit of it. But realistically, you're still going to end up getting more out of the Consecration and Wake of Ashes, because even on fights where you've got a situation which is quite rare, where you've got low priority adds but high priority single target, you do get them now and then, but very rarely. It's only useful at those times. For the rest of the fight, it's not that useful. And the problem is, of course, that you're not going to get enough stacks from Templar's Verdict on a single target to be able to buff your Judgment up enough. The irony is, although Divine Judgment looks like it's going to do better in a single target situation, it doesn't. It does way worse. Consecration, Wake of Ashes are better for single target. So, with Consecration still at the moment being slightly the best. Despite what those monkeys on the forum say. So yeah, so Divine Judgment is going to need a significant change. Now, unless they've already done it and we're just waiting for the build that reflects it. And builds seem to have been coming more quickly as well. Now that the PTR is up, and I suppose also that we're only a few weeks away from the abilities going live. I mean, these abilities that they're talking about are going live in a few weeks. Doesn't stop them changing it, and that's a bit of a concern for me, because I've already scripted the Essentials Guide, the Ret Paladin Essentials Guide, which I'd have wanted to come out for the pre-expansion patch. But now I'm thinking, do I really trust them not to, because I want it to last the whole expansion, and then do companion guides just to do updates. Can I trust them not to make massive changes? And I'm looking at it and thinking, no, I can't. So I might do a holding video just for the pre-expansion patch and wait on the bigger one for a few weeks until BfA itself comes out, because yeah, I really don't want to have to do another one with just one tiny little change in it, because that's just nonsense. But yeah, so they're rushing towards that, and I'm thinking, I don't think they are going to change Divine Judgment at this time, and I don't really see. I suppose if they went back to what Earthursa was suggesting last week, I was talking about it, where they just reduced the number of stacks you could get, but massively increase, or in proportion at least increased, what each stack does, that would help. But it would make it much more of a single target one. It's like, use this in single target situations. It's a tricky one. It's a tricky one to solve. I know Soul Sacker himself was saying they have to do something with it. They have to change it. They just have to change the way it works. Otherwise, we're not going to take it. That seems to be the bottom line. You know, that seems to be it. In terms of the APL, so the Hammer of Wrath at the moment is not looking in a great state. Obviously, we know they are going to do something with it. Whether it is increasing the damage and increasing the cooldown proportion, I don't know. But they would still have the same problem if they did that. But at the moment with the APL, that one I was talking about before, Hammer of Wrath very high. In fact, you use Hammer of Wrath as your top priority generator, not because it does the most damage or generates the most holy power, but because it reduces clashes. But now Soul Sacker is saying, actually, no. Judgment and Blade of Justice, higher priority. Blade of Justice has been significantly nerfed recently, but remember, we've got Art of War procs in it, so that's another reason to prioritise that, and it still generates 2 holy power, which is always really good. Remember, we waste Art of War effectively if when we get a reset from it, we don't use it for another few seconds anyway, because it would have naturally reset itself. So that remains high priority. Judgment is after. So we basically Blade of Justice, Judgment, and then if you've got Hammer of Wrath available, you would use Hammer of Wrath at that point. In most realistic situations, there's always little niche things. Like, for example, if you're on ads and you've got Hammer of Wrath, and you see an ad that's about to die, and you've got Blade of Justice available, obviously you still use Hammer of Wrath, because if you use Blade of Justice, it's going to die. Well, you can't then use Hammer of Wrath because it's dead now, and the other ads might be on much higher health. You've got to wait. So in a situation like that, it's either use Hammer of Wrath now or never, or right maybe on the last couple of seconds of Avenging Wrath. Then, okay, yeah, those little niche situations, okay, you raise it up. But in the normal priority system, it's dipped a little bit, Hammer of Wrath. So again, at the moment, it's just looking like what you would take is Blade of Wrath in all situations. That's just what you would do. Because it not only, you know, gives you those resets on Blade of Justice, which is very high priority, it also increases the damage of Blade of Justice. And in realistic situations, that's going to be great. Divine, so the iconic abilities, that's what we're going to go into next. So Blizzard keep talking about iconic abilities, which does my head in, because we've lost so many, haven't we? We've lost Seals, we've lost Auras, we've lost Hammer of Wrath. You know, it's sort of coming back now as a talent. But it always does my head in when sort of Blizzard talk about, oh, we want to preserve these iconic abilities, when for Paladins they've just removed all of them. Even I was saying recently, can't remember if I was saying it in the video or just in stream, even like Holy Light used to be our standard heal. You know, from Warcraft 3, that's what it was, wasn't it? Am I remembering wrong? I think I'm remembering right there. And yet the standard heal across all specs is Flash of Light, not Holy Light. It's really weird. But anyway, never mind that. So, on to defensives now. So, Talok, the first boss in Uldir, is one that has an ability in Phase 1 and Phase 3 where you get like little circles around yourself, and then we can see the Demon Hunter disappearing off there, someone else remaining behind. Because what you're about to do is drop a series of puddles. Each of those puddles that stays behind, of course, does tick in damage. You want to group them up fairly close, but you can't just stack them up because then the ticks on you would kill you, things like that. But you want to stack them up as much as possible. Now, in Phase 1, it's not actually that big a deal because it does it like 2 or 3 times, something like that. Phase 3, if I go... Oh, no, God, what am I doing? Going to another boss there. Phase 3 gets a lot messier, potentially. I mean, there are different ways of doing it. In the previous guild, when we were testing this, we had a different way of doing it, which made a lot more room. But, you know, whatever. But the issue is that there are some classes that have a defensive such that you can just get rid of it. And because they have that defensive on a short enough cooldown, they can get rid of it every time. If it hits them the next time, well, get rid of it then as well. They'd have to be... or at least every second time they can do it. So they'd have to be spammed with it every time, which would be very, very unlucky to be inconvenienced by it. So, see that I've got no movement speed at this point either, because it's a very heavy movement fight in this phase as well. And because where we're dropping them is not near the boss, I mean, I think that's something that hopefully I can persuade them to change. Then you end up in that situation again. Look, you know, died there. And what we've got to get rid of it is bubble. That's what we've got to protect ourselves against it. But we get one use of it. So we have to be fairly sure that we really are going to not be able to deal with it in a sensible way. Because as soon as we've used that bubble, then that's it. We can't... You know, if the next one's even worse, we've got nothing to protect ourselves. Whereas if we had... In the days of Divine Protection, you know, I mean, I'm not even talking about the good old days where it was half a minute. You know, 1 minute Divine Protection... of something as little... I mean, if it was eye for an eye but did spell damage as well. You know, 1 minute cooldown, 20% reduction. That's actually enough for you to be able to stack them a little bit close together. If you can stack them close together, then that means there's more room for the next set of people that need to get in. You can see there's quite a few people getting them. And although I don't think there's supposed to be quite that many on normal, I'm not sure. You know, we're talking about Mythic when we're going to be getting that. It's not going to go easy on us in Mythic. And you know, and that's the problem with the defensive. You know, Divine Shield is as good a defensive as anyone has for mechanics. Or well, it wasn't actually as good as Cloak of Shadows or Aspect of the Turtle for the Legion, but mostly it is. But the problem is that we only get to use it once in most fights. Even if we talent it and get the reduced cooldown, that's still only once a phase. In a phase like this, that might only last a few minutes, you still only get to use it once. Whereas and it sounds mad to say I'd prefer a 20% damage reduction than Divine Shield, because it's like, why? Because Divine Shield is immunity. The issue is that I'd be able to use it more often. I would be able to use it every minute. If I could use it every minute, then I can use it every time I get a shitty mechanic. Because even in Mythic fights, you tend not to get those shitty mechanics more frequently than every minute. And if you do, if those mechanics do come in more frequently than every minute, it tends not to affect everyone. It's like random selection of people, which means you'd be unlucky to get spammed repeatedly. So that's where I come from on the old defensives issues there. Now, finally, just on Azerite traits, I was I've finished leveling my second Paladin now, the Horde Paladin this time. And I was looking at the Azerite piece I had, and I was getting a trait. And there was one trait, looks quite interesting in a way. When you use Divine Shield, assuming you ever can, because you know it's too precious. But if you do, it puts an Absorb Shield on people nearby, friendly targets nearby. So nice for your raid. So you can imagine a situation, some shitty situation like there where you've got a load of crap all over the place. You're going to need to use Divine Shield, but actually you might benefit other people around you with a bit of an Absorb Shield. The problem is that the value it's given is very, very weak. Now, I was sort of told that the tech guys are going to be doing a tuning pass on the Azerite traits in a few weeks. There's not as much of a rush for that as other things, because of course the Azerite traits don't go live with the pre-expansion patch. That's not something that goes live until Legion itself in August, so that's not such high priority. So that side of it's okay, so I get that. I think that's fine. But then I was thinking, so what do you need out of an Absorb Shield, even if it's just something like that, something throwaway? Because like Blessing of Kings, for example, is an example of a piss poor absorb, isn't it? Let's face it. We use Blessing of Kings because we want the strength buff in Legion. But why would we use it in BfA other than out of habit and because you might as well, because it's not costing you anything? So in Legion, on my character at the moment, it gives me an absorb that's worth about 2% of my health, which refreshes every few seconds, every 6 seconds or so. Now 2% is a bit shit, really. Now in BfA on my character, it works out at about 3.5%, which is a bit better. But then I was thinking, well, is that just because I'm comparing a superbly geared end of expansion character in Legion and a newly dinged character in BfA? Because sometimes, although it's based on the quality of your gear, your stamina can sometimes outstrip your attack power and things like that. But in actual fact, when I compared it to how much of a Crusader strike it was absorbed, which by the way is none in any case, you know, in BfA, although a single Crusader strike would wipe it out, so it's still a worthless absorb if your weakest ability will still take it out. You know, the Crusader strike only does about 50% more than the Absorb Shield. Whereas in live on Legion, my Crusader strike would do 3 times that absorb in damage. But that's what I was thinking. So really, you want it to be better. If it's not even up to the standard of Bok, then it's going to be pretty useless. It's going to be pretty crap. And it's worse than that. It does 500, in the gear I had, 555 Absorb Shield. And I've got between 50 and 60,000 health at that point. So it's about 1%. Really pathetic. And I was getting the fact that, okay, you know, they haven't done the tuning on it yet. That's coming later. But this is what I don't get about the design process. This isn't a criticism, by the way. It's just me, you know, just things, my head basically screaming, why? Because I think to myself, I understand why you wouldn't want to give it too good a value. Because if you give something too good a value, and Blizzard have said this before, so I know that they are sensitive to this, but I appreciate it as well. Then people go, oh, it's really good. You should take this. It's amazing. And then Blizzard, when the tune it goes, you know, it's too good. And they have to nerf it. Everyone's disappointed. And then, you know, rather than just going, oh, well, it was fun while it lasted, people tend to take the more extreme view of, oh, it was really amazing and now you've killed it. You've made it useless. Thanks very much, Blizzard. So always better to make it a little bit too weak so you can always buff it. Better to give than to give something and take it away. So I'll get that. But then I was thinking to myself, but how on earth did they ever think a 1% absorb? I mean, surely that's not the minimum they're looking at. I mean, I would think of an absorb really should be, even if it's something you're just casually tossing out amongst others, 5% at least. Anything less than 5% is worthless. I would say anything less than 10% isn't very good, but anything less than 5%. And you could argue, but it's putting it on loads of people and basically for free. But then I would also say, but we've got to use Divine Shield to do it. It would be different if it was Shield of Vengeance. If when we use Shield of Vengeance, it put those absorbs on people. That would be different because we use that more frequently. And would potentially make more sense. But Divine Shield, 5-minute cooldown. 3.5 minute if you take the talent for it. But I'm going to be quite honest. In a lot of the fights that I'm seeing so far, I'd rather have Cavalier than, you know, a shorter cooldown on Divine Shield. Because, like I say, Divine Shield doesn't, even if I reduce that cooldown, for the mechanics I'd want Divine Shield for, they happen too frequently. So I'm only, you know, it's going to save me some hassle once. Just once. Whereas on other fights, you know, and on the next time, the Cavalier would help me out. Speaking of which, of course, I should probably remember to say that Cavalier has been reverted back. It was really disappointing that they changed it in BfA to having a 1 minute recharge time. That's gone back down to 45 seconds because it was just maddening. Because if you compare in BfA, if you just directly compared Legion Ret with BfA Ret, we'd had our defensives and our movement speed basically buffs directly nerfed. Both of them. Both of them. Which is pretty hard to take. So, and it's not like we were considered super speedy in Legion. I mean, the wheelchair memes didn't come out of nothing. So they've reverted that back now. So we're on movement terms, we're the same in Legion. Because they initially did nerf Blessing of Freedom and Divine Steed. Then they left Blessing of Freedom alone. Now they've left Divine Steed alone. So we're no worse off there. So in those situations, what I'm saying to you on Talok in particular, I'd rather have Cavalier because it will help me more often. You know, the Cavalier in theory could help me on, unless I get spammed with those abilities, and you can towards the end of phase 3, especially if people die. But, you know, if I'm going to get spammed with them, Cavalier will help me more than Divine Shield. Just because I can't use Divine Shield enough. But if they made eye for an eye just spell damage rather than just physical, if they made it, you know, if they made it just spell damage, as a, you know, obviously better would be all damage. But if they made it just spell damage instead of physical damage, that would be way better too. They could even get rid of the counterattack because no one, well, all right. I mean, that's more of a PvP benefit if it's a benefit at all, or solo benefit for which, you know, you could make that a PvP talent. So, I mean, that would be something. Change Eye for an Eye into Divine Protection, 20% spell damage reduction. That's what I would love. So those are my thoughts so far on where we are with the Ret Paladin changes. Again, don't expect any massive changes. Like I say, I really don't think Divine Judgement is going to change just because it's going to need something fairly hefty. It might, you know, any changes that come will ultimately not add anything, if you see what I mean. It's very much like if you think about a late change we got in Legion after tuning had started. We only got one late change, and that was that at the time, remember, Divine Steed wasn't even baseline, it was a talent. So they made it baseline and made the talent give us an extra charge of it. That sort of thing would still be potentially possible, even after the pre-patch goes live, because at the end of the day, that's not changing abilities or how they work or anything like that. We're not going to have those changed. There are specs that are in worse state than us from that point of view anyway. Enhancement Chambers and Shadow Priests are particularly vocal about it. But, I mean, it's still better than Legion. I still think I'm going to enjoy it much more than Legion. It's just whether I can approach Mythic raiding with less trepidation, because actually Mythic raiding in Legion wasn't too bad for Rets, apart from Tuma Salgaris. Whereas I'm looking ahead to some of the fights in Aldir. Not loads of the fights, but the first and the last fight is what I'm particularly looking ahead and thinking, ooh. But the last fight, ironically, the last fight, I'm not looking at it with much trepidation as the first fight. But anyway, let me know what you think below, especially if you've been in the beta trying these things out yourself. Are there any things you're not sure about? Because ask those below and I will address those. My mission at the moment is to make sure that any misconceptions are completely dispelled, as there are so many flying about. It's really annoying. Hope you enjoyed the video. If you did, don't forget to like, comment, subscribe, and share with others who might also be interested. And until next time, I'll see you later.